When Xi Jinping decided that he was going to reform and restructure the PLA, he did it in a very brutal fashion. He completely smashed the entire military to pieces, all of the four general departments, all the way down to militia units, to people's armed police units. They were all smashed to pieces. Thousands and thousands of careers were ruined by the process. And in fact, over 100 general officers, so these are generals and admirals in the Navy, they were arrested. They were arrested on corruption charges, but of course, the entire PLA is corrupt. And so what that really meant is they were arrested for noncompliance. And many of them were actually shot. In some cases, according to reports that have come out, they were shot in front of their peers because Xi Jinping wanted to send a message that he did intend to do this sweeping military reform and organization program. And the aim of that program, according to Xi Jinping's own words, was to create a joint military force that would be capable of fighting and winning any of China's envisioned future wars. And of course, the one they focused the most heavily on, and the one that's the most stressful and the most difficult from their perspective, is the invasion and occupation of Taiwan, which could very well mean fighting a protracted great power war with the United States. And so for many in the PLA, they probably regret doing the studies that they did and being as honest as they were with Xi Jinping, because he actually has acted on it. And so we're dealing with a very different Chinese military today than we were just a few years ago.
You know, I know Xi Jinping has been appointing a lot of high-ranking generals and officials in the PLA loyal to him, but from what you're saying, I wonder if at the end of the day, how the PLA actually feels about Xi Jinping, if they really are loyal to him when push comes to shove.
I mean, morale is very high when, you're shooting all the senior officers.
Yeah, and that was actually a reason for some optimism just a few years ago, that when analysts started to see, people in Washington, D.C., for example, that study the Chinese military, when they started to see this sweeping military reform and reorganization program take place, when they saw those, literally thousands of high-ranking military officers, including in some cases, 3-star generals, which is our equivalent of a 4-star general, as high as you can go. Some of these guys being arrested and then suicided or actually shot in front of their peers. There was great optimism, I think, in Washington that program would fail, that it would actually serve to weaken the People's Liberation Army. It would certainly devastate their morale, and I'm sure it did that. But what it also seems to have done is it shocked everybody into this really subservient position, that those that survived are terrified for their own lives and the health and well-being of their families. And so they've all fallen into line. And everybody who hasn't fallen into line behind whatever Xi Jinping wants to do, because now he's a full-on dictator in a way that China hasn't had since Mao Zedong, everybody who didn't go along has now been thrown into prison. If you go in prison in China, you're tortured. And so that's a really awful fate. And again, many of them were executed as well. And so now we're dealing with the Chinese military, where there may be a lot of hard feelings. There certainly are. There must be. But they will probably do anything that they're asked to do or they're directed to do by Xi Jinping. If he truly, in his heart of hearts, has plans to invade and occupy Taiwan, and he certainly does, I think he's been very clear about that in some of his public statements. If that's true, it's very difficult now to imagine him getting any good military advice. It's very difficult to imagine any general or any military advisor, or any civilian advisor, national security matters for that matter, saying to Xi Jinping, "Sir, the odds of failure are still too high. Maybe it's a 50-50 shot by the year 2025. Maybe we should go then. 50-50 odds are, those are gambling odds. And in war, that's probably about the best you can hope for." If they tried it today, and as I've said, they couldn't physically do it right now, but say they did it in March or April next year, I think their odds of success are still quite small, but those odds are going to continue to increase every year going forward, because they have engaged in this massive, really incredible military buildup. And I think seeing the results of 5 years of their military reform program has really forced a lot of people in the Pentagon and in other places, in the US government and other governments around the region, to look at China's military really with new eyes. And the picture that they see is one that's actually very dark for the future.